All right. So welcome everybody to the first roundtable in the Feminism in Contemporary US Popular Culture cycle. So my name is Sara, or Sarah, whichever you prefer, and I will be moderating the discussion today. This is the first roundtable, as you know, iterations of 21st century feminism, new media, and popular culture. So allow me to just thank you all for coming and to warmly thank our participants as well for being a part of this event. I'm just going to be here to pose a few questions to our three participants to hopefully, spark the discussion, which should last approximately for an hour or so. So during this time, the audience, as Anna mentioned before, please keep your microphones and cameras off so that we do not get interrupted accidentally. And once this hour of discussion is up, I will open the floor to the audience for a 15-minute Q&A session, approximately, during which you can feel free to ask any questions or make comments for our participants, turn on your cameras, your microphones, and just ask, or ask through the chat if that makes you more comfortable. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our participants now. In alphabetical order, we first have Dr. Megan Condis. She is an assistant professor in communication studies at Texas Tech University, and her book, Gaming Masculinity, Trolls, Fake Geeks, and the Gendered Battle for Online Culture was published in 2018 by the University of Iowa Press, focusing on the intersections between technology and racial, gendered, and sexual identities. Next is Dr. Sarah Hosti. She has a PhD in American literature and teaches English and women's studies at the Nassau Community College. She has recently published two books, one of which is an academic treatise called Home is Where the Hurt Is, Media Depictions of Wives and Mothers, that was published in 2019 by Macfarlane Press. And the other one is a young adult novel called Triviño Murphy, published in 2020, so very recent. Congratulations on that one. And finally, we have Dr. Laura Triviño Cabrera, who is the director of the Department of Didactics of Mathematics, Didactics of Social Sciences, and Didactics of Experimental Sciences. Sorry, that's kind of a mouthful, at the University of Málaga. She has a PhD in Education and Social Communication from the Universidad in Portugal, and a PhD in Art History from UNED. Her research focuses mostly on feminist critical literacy, multimodality, audiovisual aesthetics, media culture, visibility of women artists, and as well the teaching of humanities from the perspective of intersectional feminism. It is very nice to finally meet you all. Thank you very much for being here with us. I'm very excited to talk to you today. So without further ado, I say we can get started if you like. Once again, I encourage the three of you to just bounce off of each other's answers, debate amongst yourselves, or even ask each other questions if you're feeling like it, so that we can get the discussion going. So I wanted to actually start us off on a bit of a more general note, if that's okay. So what are your thoughts on the idea of popular culture as minor or as inferior? This is a bit of a general idea, I know, but do you think this is exclusive perhaps to academia, or does this kind of perception, dismissive perception, extend to the general public? What do you think? Any of you can begin.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is the reactions that happen sometimes within gamer culture when academics come in and try to critique. So you have the response that, oh, this is just video games. We're just doing this for fun. It doesn't, you're reading too much into it if you are, trying to examine it through a critical lens, which makes me think, so like scholars like, Henry Jenkins, or like some of the early scholars who talked about fandom would discuss fandom as this kind of like folk culture that's getting kind of intentionally left out by scholarship. But sometimes when I study gamer culture, I think that people will try to kind of protect popular culture from scholarly criticism by kind of saying, well, it's just pop culture, so you can't have it. We want to keep it and kind of protect it from critique. So, I think it runs both ways. Like it can be used as like kind of an attack to say, oh, pop culture isn't like deserving of criticism. We only care about the classics. Like I think that's kind of the traditional view, but also sometimes it can be used as like a popular shield of, stay out of this. We want to keep this for ourselves. We don't want this to become something that gets kind of more general critical attention. I don't know if you guys had also experienced that in your various fields, but yeah.
Megan, I think that's absolutely an accurate description. And I think that when I was writing my book, Home is Where the Hurt Is, there is certainly the sense that when I was doing presentations, sometimes to students, an almost resistance to talking about popular culture because, as I said in one of my presentations, your faves are problematic, which doesn't mean you can't enjoy them or still engage with them, but it should also not preclude thinking critically about them. And I did one presentation which I started with this lyric. I don't know if you guys will recognize it. I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved. It's from the Beatles. And I use that to begin because we often think about this kind of contemporary moment as being particularly misogynistic or toxic or gross. But in fact, pop culture has a long tradition of being toxic and misogynistic and gross. And in fact, some of our beloved kind of saints of popular culture, like the Beatles, who we often think of as really kind of, I mean, I think if you know anything about John Lennon, you know that in fact his life was pretty problematic, right? But I think that because, you know, they're older and sometimes we see them in black and white pictures, we think of them as sanitized or something. So that in fact, it's not like a new thing for misogyny to sell. And in fact, it's a time honored tradition. So I do think people get a little uptight about the critical discussion of pop culture. And I engage in the critical discussion of pop culture, but to kind of do a little bit of an unpopular opinion, I would say that maybe we also need to tease out, how is pop culture, is it lesser than in our critical discourse? Is it lesser than in the culture? And I would say, having written a book on popular culture, there are some pop culture artifacts that are not made to last. You know what I mean? Like the more critical tools I tried to use, the more they kind of disintegrated in my fingers because there wasn't that much thought put into them. So, you know, sometimes when you look at a movie from the 90s, for example, and it was very easy to find movies from the 90s that demonstrated post-feminist neoliberal ideology because they were trash and they weren't that well conceived and they were, you know, they were put out there to make a buck and not necessarily put out there with a lot of intentional consideration, as opposed to an art house film in which you would see, right, a lot of kind of hand-wringing and attention to detail and messaging, right, that gave me as a critic more to work with, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't so easy to be like, oh, this is what's going on here. So again, I certainly don't want to say that I think, particularly as a critic of pop culture, I'm not saying that pop culture is necessarily inferior, but I would say sometimes we really do some sort of intellectual acrobatics trying to justify looking at a text, a TikTok video, or an advertisement, or a bubblegum movie, and trying to justify our criticism of it, even though, you know, maybe it was just fun. So kind of going back to that student attitude. So I said a lot. I'll mute myself.
No, of course.
Like almost the planned obsolescence of content. Like your VCR is designed to break down fast. This movie is designed. I like that idea of it just dissolving on your tongue like sugar. That's a great metaphor.
Firstly, I would like to say it's very happy to be here. For me, from my point of view, I have a vision, a different vision, I think, because I am a professor of social science education. So when I started to think, to research on popular culture, to include popular culture in teacher education, I had a lot of obstacles because it was difficult to find a professor, a specialist in popular culture and feminist. I had two problems in my classes. Firstly, introducing popular culture, and secondly, introducing feminism. So it was very difficult. It was a real challenge. On the one hand, I think popular culture is very important to promote a democratization process, by recognizing them within the school curriculum, where there was only room for the values of high culture, resulting in students writing about their daily life experience discussing popular songs or discussing contemporary social issues. On the other hand, as Walker suggests, in my case, I am a professor of teachers. So I think teachers who provide opportunities for students to create these emotional connections through their incorporation of popular culture will achieve the goal of powerful social study teaching and learning. So it's a hard work because students, my students think popular culture shouldn't be in universities because I think it's underestimated. So it's very important to develop critical thinking to introduce popular culture, because popular culture is part of capitalist system. So it's necessary to develop this type of thinking. So.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. That was actually one of the questions I had planned on asking, as in, as far as the educational or pedagogical uses of popular culture go. Do you think perhaps because we conceive of it as a very, for a very young audience, do you think it's easier for students to be introduced to complex ideas through popular culture in a classroom context? So for example, is it easier for a student to connect and to really critically think about a text if they are familiar with it through its, popular mainstream sort of status? Do you think that's the case?
I find a problem because it's McRobbie said distance from feminism. I realized I have a type of feminist, maybe classic feminist. My students are post-feminist, so there are very difficulties to understand. It's very important to teach the meaning of feminist theory. So, for example, in my classes, I try to talk about feminism. My students in our society, we are in equal opportunities. It's not necessary. One day, I projected Beyonce's video. Above all my female students, oh Beyonce. If I were a boy, so my students, oh, Beyonce, she's strong, she's beautiful, like Beyonce. So I realized when you use popular culture, it's easier to talk about feminism. So I think it's very important to include, for example, when I was an adolescent, I learned, I listened to feminist girl power when I listened to Spice Girls. So.
I really enjoy, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I just would say that I agree that when I teach a gender and pop culture course, and absolutely, but even in a women's studies 101 course, I think it's sound pedagogy to let the students be the experts, right, and to feel really comfortable with the text, right, that perhaps I'm not super comfortable with, so that they can be they can be the ones who take the lead in terms of that analysis and criticism. Sometimes I do think that kind of retreading what we had covered, I do think that there is the kind of pushback that Megan has identified. I think also sometimes students are really protective. Like it's really hard. Like when we do Beyonce, you know, the beehive is real. And there are those who are, they own her in a way that will not allow them to not even be critical in a negative way, but to really even apply that critical lens in any way that kind of goes beyond she's like a goddess or whatever. And then just one, this was a teaching fail, but it's just an interest. I mean, I should have anticipated it, but I once asked them, we were doing a unit on, I think it was, you know, I was trying out a new unit on looking at depictions of non-consensual sex in movies and television. And I was trying to get at the idea that often, especially in the 80s and the 90s, we saw consensual sex as either a joke or the right thing to do, right? Because she said no, but now she's in love with him. So like 16 Candles is a kind of prime example of an 80s movie in which someone is raped, but it all works out and it's kind of funny, right? So I had given them some examples and then I had told them to bring in examples. Again, you probably are already like, you are an idiot. But you know, they just came in with examples of horrible rapes in movies and shows. So like the first 2 or 3 students to present, like we had, you know, the equipment and the technology, and they would get up and show like a horror movie in which a woman is being like gang raped. So then it's like, oh my God, like, and then I'm like, okay, well, they would give a trigger warning. So that was great, but it was still kind of like, I don't even really want to watch this, you know? And then I was like, well, that was just that one. And then the next one kind of did the same kind of presentation. And I realized that I wasn't kind of clear in terms of, as viewers, we were looking for something a little more subtle. We were, you know, those were depictions of rape in which rape is bad. And I was looking for depictions of non-consensual sex in which it was depicted as good or funny, but that nuance was lost on them. And the class was kind of a disaster. And I say this not to just suggest that my students are not sophisticated. I clearly didn't set up the assignment accurately, but I do think that that is kind of one of the roads, like you let them be the experts and then they're the experts and maybe you don't like what they have to say or share as the experts, and you kind of get stuck maybe in a bit of a quandary there.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a really interesting assignment. And it gets me thinking about how to select texts that are going to be productive, but that aren't going to be so close to home for them that they feel like, well, this is part of my identity. And so if I attack this text, I'm attacking my own identity. And I feel like in my experience, it's sort of starting to shift, because it seemed like 90s was perfect because they have like vague memories of it being popular, but it's not like a thing that was so close to their heart. And I'm loving all the music examples. I need to get like more up on my music examples, but the idea of like, yeah, we can think critically about the Beatles because I have sort of vague, fuzzy idea of who that is. But if you're talking about Bey, like that's my girl, right? And so like, how do you pick those perfect examples? But now what I'm noticing, and this is what's difficult about teaching this stuff, is my students now, because unfortunately time continues to pass, I wish it wouldn't, right? But now it's starting to get like, they were young in like early 2000s. And so now my 90s examples aren't hitting at all. It's like, so how many of you guys in here, you know, have seen, I used to use Titanic. That was like my go-to example. And now like, maybe some of them have seen memes of like, you know, flying on the bow of the ship, but a lot of them have not seen the whole 3-hour movie. And so then it becomes, now I'm explaining this movie to you in order to use it as an example. Or like it used to be The Matrix, like a few of them who, if they were sci-fi fans, would have seen it, but not all. But now it's coming back, right? Now the 4th sequel is coming out. And so now it's a relevant example again. And so it just does mean, I think, you have to constantly be on your toes. And like, I love the idea of maybe asking the students to bring examples, or maybe even like surveying the students like early in the class. And then I bring in the examples so that I can like, now I know what you want to talk about and I've pre-screened those, but it's a lot of work, right? As a teacher, it means you can't just be like, here's my evergreen slides that I created on my first year on the tenure track, and they're just going to keep them forever. It's like, you have to kind of constantly recycle and refresh, which is good. Like you know, that's what we should be doing as teachers, but it just means a lot of planning in your off season, in your summer.
Of course, I feel like that is the eternal dilemma of the teacher. Like you have a really good example, but it no longer connects with them, and the things that do connect with them, you know, they're kind of the double-edged sword in the sense that you all said they connect really well with them and they're very interested in the assignment, but also they sometimes lack the critical skill to actually confront it from a distance position because they just love it so much. And, you know, on that note, I was wondering what you all think about popular culture as relates to, you know, representation, especially, you know, with all this connection that we have going on nowadays with the rise of the internet, the rise of fandom culture, I think was mentioned before as well. I wonder whether you think these types of spaces have made of popular culture a particularly welcoming sort of space for, you know, not just women's narratives, because we're focusing on feminism in this case, but also for people of color, for LGBTQ identities, so on and so forth. Do you think, you know, popular culture has been particularly suitable for reappropriation on behalf of these kinds of marginal identities, rather than, you know, the mainstream, canonical, whatever?
Well, I have a lot to say about this, so I'm going to try to limit my comments. But I would say that, you know, many years ago, maybe 10 years, it wasn't that year, 10 years ago, I was talking to a male colleague. And, you know, at this point in my life, I was really wrestling with loving stuff that was misogynistic and racist. And I would say I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So I would, you know, like 95% of the media I consumed, you know, had rape in it as a joke or a tool of romance, was ableist, was racist, was classist. I mean, really just has a lot of stuff I loved is really problematic. So I mentioned this to a white male colleague who's like a really nice guy, but he kind of didn't get what I was talking about at all. And he goes, I don't consume any media that doesn't align with my values. And I don't think that he is a particularly bad person. I just think he was never asked to consider whether or not his media aligned with his values, that, you know, it just was not a question for him. I do feel that kind of surveying media from then until now, we've seen really wonderful changes in representation. And I think if you seek out feminist, anti-racist media, you can find it. Feminist, anti-racist popular culture in general, whether that's on TikTok or on Netflix, there are these really wonderful creators doing really cool and interesting stuff and getting eyeballs in a way that they weren't even 10 years ago, right? It's still super depressing though, right? The landscape itself is still super depressing. And there, you know, now I can't remember the name of the book. If it comes back to me, I'll put it in the chat. But there was a book just around the time of Donald Trump's election that pointed out that, you know, I think a lot of us in pop culture have been like, change is happening, representation is happening. We are changing people's hearts and minds with shows like Insecure and Transparent and Jane the Virgin. And guess what? Americans voted Donald Trump into office. You know, like it didn't like, there was a disconnect between what Hollywood saw in terms of our values and then what the rest of the country chose to represent our values, which again, that's too general. And I recognize that he didn't win the popular vote, but I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that we maybe put too much faith in the positive power of popular culture. Or maybe people like just optimists like myself did. The last thing I'll say about this though, is that because this is like a consuming interest of mine, that's part of why I wrote a young adult novel. I wrote a feminist young adult novel that is far from perfect, but tried to do a lot of the things that I wanted to see in my fiction. So, you know, I have a trans character and I have a plucky runaway, and I, you know, like there's you know, an interracial relationship, you know, the kind of, maybe I threw too much into the pot, but I would say that at least the idea there was to not only be a critic, but then also be a creator, to also kind of put in what I would wanted to see in pop culture in the world. But I do think representation has gotten better. We have so much farther to go. Every piece of data you look at is still abysmal numbers in terms of behind the camera, who's writing, who's making the money, and who's directing. And I think that, although I think, and perhaps some of the other panelists can speak to this, you know, I do think social media, for better or for worse, though, is maybe the exception. I mean, I think that maybe we're seeing really cool content and creators in social media getting airtime in a way that they aren't necessarily in Hollywood.
from my point of view, it is clear that the many forms and issues of feminism are of interest to younger generations who in recent years, and especially since the rise of the internet, have established networks with an extraordinary capacity for social mobilization, as has been demonstrated in the last two celebrations of International Women's Day around the world. These are young people who have learned about feminism through pop culture, and yet they find no reference to in the academic world. So, for example, I developed an education project, Philosophies. We try to teach women philosophers using music video singers. So it was very interesting to know different feminism, feminist theory. So I think there are many possibilities with popular culture. And I think our students recognize in popular culture, so it's very important to include.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you guys. I look at some of the like intense backlash that takes place within online gaming culture whenever women or queer people or people of color end up being represented in this game series where they hadn't been present before. So like right now, the controversy of the day is the video game series God of War just released a trailer for their forthcoming next game. And they had, there's going to be a Black god, a Black female god, and she has, you know, dreads, and she's, you know, in there with the Greek gods and the Norse gods and all these different people. And the immediate backlash was, you know, she doesn't belong in this story. You're just adding this person in to get woke points or to virtue signal, and you know, you should be taking into account what real gamers want. Real gamers being code for like straight white male adolescents. And you know, I'm sort of in keeping with what Sarah said earlier, that I want to be cautious and not kind of think that representation is the thing that will kind of magically save us and will like revolutionize ideology. But at the same time, seeing cycles like that happen over and over in gamer culture, where devs are being attacked or like, you know, female streamers are being harassed, really makes me realize that, you know, their resistance to representation suggests that this representation is powerful in some way, right? Like we wouldn't be trying so hard to gatekeep these pop culture activities if it wasn't doing something to have these different types of people present in the space. And so, yeah, like, you know, getting into the space doesn't mean like, and now we're done with feminism. We don't have to like worry about legal policy or the Supreme Court or anything. Like, we definitely still have to worry about all that. But there is something powerful about entering into a space that you know is going to be kind of hostile to you and seeing someone is already there who looks like you. Like we saw that with, you know, people talking about going into Black Panther and having their, you know, small children say like, I didn't know that, you know, you were allowed to be a superhero if you were Black, or seeing like little girls going to see Captain Marvel and being like, you know, or Wonder Woman or whatever it is, and saying like, oh my gosh, that could be me. I could be strong. And like, you know, that seems very kind of Pollyanna-ish, but I do think that like emotional power is something important, even if it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? To liberation.
Absolutely. Great points, all of you. No, go ahead, Dr. Hosey, please.
I wanted to affirm what Megan was saying. I think that's a really nice balanced way of thinking about it. And that, how did you put it? Necessary but not sufficient, maybe, I think is exactly right.
Yeah. Precisely one of the questions I also had was, do you think this, improvement that we have been seeing in terms of numbers as far as representation is concerned, is this necessarily or perhaps intrinsically linked to, a larger or somehow more, a better presence of marginal identities in the position of authors and in the position of creators? So for example, a lot of, authors of color speak of wanting to see themselves into the fictions that they used to consume as children. And a lot of women authors as well spoke of wanting to see a protagonist that looks like them or that was a woman, especially in genres that, lacked this female presence, such as, fantasy, for example, had lacked a female presence or a strong female presence until very recently. So do you think there is a connection there? And has there been a change then in how these types of fictions transmit or somehow convey the patriarchal culture that we come from and that we're raised in?
Yeah, maybe if it's okay, I'll jump in real quick. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to harp on like the gaming stuff, but that's just what I'm most familiar with. I absolutely think that the increase in the number of like women and queer people and people of color in the like on the dev side is leading to this increased representation, and like specifically in the indie scene. So not necessarily in the like AAA Call of Duties, whatever they are, right? But definitely more in the like the small independent studios and like the individual game creators. And I think a lot of that has to do in on the gaming side with just the proliferation of game design tools that are widely accessible and that are cheap. So like you can download a copy of Game Maker Studio for $20 and put something together and get it up and running on the itch kind of game distribution website for, extremely, I mean, not cheap in terms of time. It's still a lot of effort to program a game, but like you don't need access to supercomputers and you don't need $1 million proprietary software that you had to get licensed through your studio. Like you have these sort of democratized tools, and you have tools like Twitch and like YouTube that allow you to publicize your game and get it out there. And so, yeah, it just sort of seems like opening up those tools to making them more sort of available to everyone. And then these places where these little micro projects are getting attention. I'm going to create a 1 hour long story about my own experience, and it doesn't have to be everything to everyone and focus group tested and guaranteed to make $10 million. It can just be this small expressive project that I put up on Kickstarter, and that I look for like-minded fans who are interested in that type of story to help fund my project. So like, yeah, like the microeconomics of it, I think, at least on the gaming side, is really useful to that positive feedback loop.
So if you don't mind, I'll build on what Megan is saying. I have a couple different examples. One is, now this is not, I don't know about gaming side, but I find it fascinating what you're saying. But Issa Rae started, so she is the showrunner of Insecure, which was a very successful HBO show about, Black women's lives. I don't know, I mean, it's not without complete precedent, but Insecure was definitely something new, special, and very exciting. But she got started on a YouTube show that she did, Awkward Black Girl, that just developed a following. And of course, Hollywood goes where the money is, right? So she was successful on YouTube, and she got a deal, and she's been quite successful, since. However, there are, again, institutional obstacles. So I found this quote here. It's from the Hollywood Diversity Report. I think it's actually from 2019. But basically, I'm going to summarize and say that diverse television shows and films actually do very well in the box office, and Americans tend to like them, right? And yet we still don't see their numbers necessarily rising. So those gatekeepers, even when something is lucrative, are still hesitant to put out, content that is an all-Black cast or an all-Black female cast, for example, right? Because they're still wary of whether or not audiences, even though that's been disproven, they're still wary of whether or not audiences will come around. So, just kind of in terms of the fight that we're continuing to have, it's on the one hand, we shouldn't have to prove that feminist anti-racist content needs to be made. But even when we do prove that the audiences will come, sometimes the gatekeepers are still not opening the gates, to stay with that metaphor.
Dr. Triviño, do you have any thoughts on this? Would you like to weigh in as well?
I would like to add another question or another issue. For example, the opportunities of popular culture to learn important words. For example, I read the Zendaya's declarations, the actress Zendaya. I think it's very important. I read, Zendaya says, true feminists should be inclusive of all women, including those who don't look like you or have experiences that are different from you. That means Black women, that means trans women, that means all women. So I think popular culture has an important role for the visibility, how to improve our society. On the other hand, I think it's an alliance between patriarchy culture and popular culture. So, for example, I think feminism sells, or post-feminism sells. However, I think it's very important the role for the visibility. So there are young people, there are female students, my students, that don't know intersectionality. So if they listen to Zendaya, they discover other realities, important concepts for the daily, for our lives.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. Go ahead.
I think that this is a show that speaks to a lot of what this part of the conversation is getting at, that I would recommend, which is Jane the Virgin, which was like a WBCW show. And it's often very metatextual. And there's an episode in which Jane, who is herself an author, is writing a novel and it doesn't pass the Bechdel test. And then the episode itself has a narrator who points out that the show itself is not passing the Bechdel test. So it's got these kind of meta levels in it, and it's very charming. But there's a wonderful moment in which a mother and a daughter are arguing, and they go to a Hollywood studio where there's been a show, like a sitcom being filmed, that's been orchestrated to kind of mimic their argument. And it does, and they watch it. And one of the executives say, I hope that there's going to be some sort of twist, like there's an alien clone, because nobody wants to watch a show about a mom and her daughter, right? So you have this kind of making fun of the Hollywood execs who, of course, people want to watch a show about a mom and a daughter, the Gilmore Girls, Jane the Virgin, but that still remains the attitude that, women and women's lives are boring, not interesting, not going to make the money. Now, there's that part of the show, but the other part that I want to point out is that the two characters who are in the argument, who watch the filming of the sitcom, reconcile as a result. And it goes back to kind of Megan's points about the importance of seeing yourself represented. And the idea is that media can be healing. Media can be uplifting. Pop culture can be, can make us better people, right? And in fact, I would say that I am I'm boring everyone around me with my love for TikTok these days. There's just so much cool and interesting content on there. And when I talk to a lot of folks, especially folks my age, they're very dismissive of it as dancing and, and kind of meaningless content, right? I see so many cool creators doing anti-racism and feminism, trans awareness. I see folks doing a lot of like mental health stuff that's really interesting and helpful. So I guess what I'm getting at is again, kind of the positive possibilities for popular culture and the ways in which, you know, again, that representation is not only important, it can be uplifting and healing and all of like those things that we want it to be.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking also on the issue of intersectionality, which Dr. Triviño raised, because that has been very important, especially as of late. There have been many controversies about this as well. I was thinking in particular of an example, if I may, of young adult author Naomi Novik, which was quite recent with her latest book, A Deadly Education, I think it's called. She wrote a Black character in the book, and she used a word that was not the best word to describe her hairstyle, which was dreads, I think. And there was a lot of backlash to her about that because the published version of the book had already printed the word and the first edition was already in circulation, etc. So she couldn't have changed it possibly. And a lot of cancellation going on as well, which is also another controversy that I would like you to address if you can. But yeah, I was thinking, what do you think about this, you know, making mistakes when trying to be inclusive? Do you think the reaction is perhaps disproportionate? How can we reach, you know, the middle ground? Because she did acknowledge the mistake that she had made. And she did address it on Twitter, and she did change the word, she changed the wording, and she reprinted the books so that it would not appear in there anymore. So I was thinking what you think about this sort of thing, and, you know, writing from another's perspective, from a position of privilege, how does that impact the fiction that results?
I would just be curious because I don't know this controversy. So she's a white author and she wrote a Black character.
Yeah. She's a white author, American author of Polish ascendancy. She's very famous for having created Archive of Her Own along with the other another team of people. But yeah, she's a white American author trying to write, you know.
It was
I'll write it down.
I'm sorry, it's a recent book. It just came out.
Yeah, it came out just, I think either this year or last year.
Well, I missed that controversy totally, but maybe that's a good thing. I mean, I'll give a milquetoast answer. Maybe somebody has something more interesting to say other than, you know, I do. Thank you. I'll have to Google this. I'm totally unfamiliar with it. I think it's important to be very sensitive and careful. I think that, I don't know Naomi Novik, but just from your description, it sounds like she had a big publisher behind her that probably had lots of resources that should have been used to prevent this controversy. So my heart breaks for her. I mean, I think it's every author's worst fear to be canceled, especially when you're trying to do the right thing or to be sensitive and intelligent. I do think that, again, she had a machine behind her. They should have had somebody catch that on, you know, they probably spent so much money on publicity. Why couldn't they spend a little bit more on editing, would be my question, or having a Black editor? Did anybody Black read the book? You know, would be the next question that I ask. Again, you know,
of the sensitivity reader.
Yeah, they should have. Absolutely. I would, you know, I would like to see publishers held responsible. I think that authors, and it's a very tricky one. There are clearly authors that have done worse things. But you know, I appreciate that we live in a moment where people are being called to account for their work. I wish that, you know, sometimes where it gets a little bit tricky is that I think there are people out there putting out gross and horrible and really overtly misogynistic content that we don't necessarily scrutinize. They don't care that we don't like it, right? It's really the ones who are trying to do the right things that care when they get that kind of backlash. But I'll leave it there. But my comment would be, I think that there was a failure along the way. She should be held accountable. I think others might also bear the brunt. It's not just one person, scapegoat. She sucks. We hate her now, but Penguin or Harper or whoever it was that put that book out, they should be bearing some of this responsibility as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And especially one thing that you said really resonated with me, which was that people who are creating, you know, outright hostile content, I feel like fans know that they won't be effective at calling that person to account. And so, you know, there's this weird paradox of someone who's trying is possible to be moved. And so we're going to try to move that person. Someone who's not trying, or who's not, for whom we are not their audience, for whom like their audience is people who enjoy racist and sexist content. It's not even worth bothering to try to go after them, because they're just going to say, you know, triggered much, or like they're just going to like embrace it. Right. And so like, what is to be done about that? Like, I guess you could call it like the circular firing squad of, you know, people who are trying to express, you know, a lot of times it's not like this one book was upsetting to me. It's this one book is just one more example, like on the pile of microaggressions that I've experienced. And so, you know, how do we create a culture of critique that does hold people accountable for things, but that isn't, you know, well, let's all get together and banish the wrongdoer, and, you know, now that person is not going to try anymore. I don't know. It's a hard thing. And I feel like as a white woman, I need to be listening to other people on this question, because I don't want it to come off as, well, let's make sure we center all the white feminists' feelings because they're trying so hard. And like, you know, like that, we don't want to do that. But at the same time, you know, I think it is relevant to bring up the idea that if we kind of keep all of our critiques within our bubble, then we're not speaking to these other folks on the outside who have these different audiences that maybe we also need to be not going after sounds aggressive, but like, you know, reaching out towards or making connections with. But I would definitely welcome in the Q&A, if other folks have other thoughts on this question. You know, that seems like one where, you know, I would want to definitely hear from other folks on what they think is the solution to that. And I think we've maybe lost Dr. Triviño.
She's not here. Oh my gosh. Maybe she disconnected on accident.
Yeah, she blinked away. So I don't, yeah, hopefully she's
Oh, maybe she lost connection. Hopefully she'll be back. Yeah, I had another thing. Yes, here it is. Yes, on this whole line of, you know, the popularization of, you know, the making trendy of social movements. So feminism, Black Lives Matter lately, especially, you know, on social media, they have been rising in interactions in popularity, you could say, although that is mostly because they have a lot of people supporting them. And social media has contributed to that, to the creation of, you know, these support networks and these networks through which people can coordinate with each other to create a revolutionary protest and support each other through this life-changing sort of event. What do you think about how, you know, the status quo, I suppose, governments, corporations, and so on and so forth, reappropriate these movements and diffuse them with this false sense of security, like you have succeeded, there it is, we have acknowledged you, we know you're there. This ties in with something Dr. Condis mentioned earlier as well, like if you appear in this video game, that's it, that's enough, that's your thing. Or if you appear in this book, that's your thing, you have that, why are you complaining anymore? What do you think of this sort of, you know, reappropriation of the movement and its regurgitation through the capitalist, patriarchal, etc. machine?
Yeah, like the ultimate expression of that is like the commodification of a social movement, right? Like I'm going to print t-shirts that say Me Too on them in a really cool font. And if you buy that, then now that you did a feminism and now you can be done for the day and you don't have to do any more, you know, protesting or watching of the news or anything like that. Yeah. Or like the other example that pops into my mind is just like the sort of NFL struggles with kneeling during the national anthem. And like, are we going to like push back against it? Well, people don't seem to like that, but are we going to embrace it? Well, people don't seem to like that. And so, you know, maybe we'll just do, I think at the Super Bowl, they did like a second song, like a second national anthem that was the African-American national anthem or something like that. I'm not a sports person, so I don't know if I'm getting the details exactly right on that, but you can like see it happen in real time, where it's like, let's almost like market test A and B and C, and then it becomes, you know, we're just trying to kind of follow what's the thing that's not even necessarily what most people endorse, but what's the thing that's going to be acceptable enough to everyone across multiple different ideologies that no one will be happy, but no one will be so mad that they boycott our product. And yeah, so it's this weird like triangulation of, and it seems like it maybe defaults mostly to, can we just keep everything the way that it is, except insert a little like message where they say, we would like everyone to know that we stand with group X. Because that way, if no one's like, football games get interrupted, like we still get to have that to look forward to on Sundays. And if the movie release schedules of our favorite stars aren't interrupted, we will put up with this trigger warning that got inserted at the beginning of the movie, or we will put up with this, you know, sort of minor concession. And I don't know where I was going with that point. I guess I sort of got lost in my examples, but yeah, like this idea that we're just trying to find not like the thing that would be in keeping with the values of our audience members, but just the thing that's going to offend the fewest audience members. That at least in my observation, that seems like what corporations are doing. I couldn't speak to you. You also mentioned governments. I'd be curious if folks have thoughts on that one, but.
Well, I'll give you another example, not of governments, but I just read an article that there was a planned reality television show that was scrapped because people were like, this is horrible. But the premise was to pit activists against each other, so that each, you know, there'd be a representative from Black Lives Matter and there'd be a representative from a pro-choice group, and it would be like who could get more signatures or raise more money. Or so, of course, you know, for 30 years, we've been talking about a politics of affiliation, right? Yes, they did cancel that show. But the idea, yeah, exactly, making activism capitalist, but also, you know, separating and dividing and conquering us that way, right? That we don't, it's not that, you know, again, it's not feminism if it's not anti-racist, right? But if we want to pit, as I think the capitalists, I think at least in the United States has been going on for centuries, this idea that feminists and Black activists hate each other and must be working against each other, right? That is not coming, I don't think, organically. That is being imposed upon us. And some people do drink that Kool-Aid, obviously. But I think that, again, that is a strategy that weakens us. There's some really interesting stuff in the chat too, just about TikTok. And I'll just go ahead and read your comments out loud if that's okay with everybody. But Alba wrote, personally, I think that to be dismissive of TikTok is actually kind of a way of isolating yourself from a fundamental part of nowadays popular culture. It is a very important role in how young generations are building their identity, and it should be taken in consideration when approaching topics such as the ones the speakers are talking about today. And then Glenda agreed, saying not only young generations, I believe the impact goes beyond, but it's also a way to democratize information as well as new unheard voices, even though there's still a problem with internet access. But again, it is a step forward in a good direction, sort of. And I agree with both of you. I mean, I think TikTok, certainly, my experience has been really, you know, positive. But I think, first of all, when old people like myself get on TikTok, though, it does lose its edge. So I don't know, maybe TikTok won't be so great that much longer. But Alba also talks about the Spanish TikTok mental health activism. Totally cool. There are several people, usually psychologists, saying things that are worth listening to. As a teenager, I didn't grow up being aware of the importance of my mental health, and I'm happy younger generations will have this chance. I couldn't agree more, Alba. I've been so impressed with what I'm seeing on TikTok in mental health videos. I wonder, though, one of the things that people say to me, though, when they push back on my TikTok fangirling, is that my content is curated to what I like. So I'm getting that content, and I'm getting feminist content, etc. I'm not getting the anti-vax, Trump will rise again content. And that's like the other side of TikTok, right? That if honestly people didn't tell me about it, I don't know that I would know it existed, other than when there's duets and they make fun of them, right? So I do think that it is another opportunity, unfortunately, for some folks to strengthen that bubble that Megan's talking about, so that you're really like the internet, right? I'm sorry, I'm going too fast. Like the internet in general, it's an opportunity to meet people who will reaffirm what you already believe, right? So you can go on TikTok and become more entrenched in your anti-vax positions, because that's the only content you're seeing because of the algorithm. So that is, I think, a danger of the platform. Now, I'd be very comfortable here. I know that a lot of folks in our audience seem to have stuff to say about TikTok. So I'm personally really comfortable if we want to open up the Q&A
Yeah.
for people on this topic in particular.
No, yeah, I was going to suggest, like, since people in the chat are keen on interacting in this topic, we could open up the floor to the audience for questions. It's a shame that Dr. Triviño cannot join us, but I think, you know, her connection died. So yeah, if anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to type them in so we can read them, or feel free to, you know, raise your hand or unmute yourself so I can give you the floor and just ask. This has been a very interesting discussion so far. The awkward silence. Oh, okay, there we go. Right in the chat. It is a comment rather than a question. I think Resident Evil as a game and as a movie, for example, provides a strong positive female representation in terms of survival, compassion, caring, fighting for freedom in a sense, etc. On the other hand, there are certain video clips of songs that are showing some feminist stereotyped aspects, which means feminists still have a lot to struggle for. I assume Dr. Condis will be familiar with Resident Evil. I don't know if Dr. Hosey will. I am honestly familiar with the series, but have not played any of the games nor watched the movies. So maybe Dr. Condis can comment on this.
Yeah, I am a wuss, so I don't play a lot of the horror titles, but I've seen the Resident Evil movie series. And yeah, I think Resident Evil is a good example of the strong female hero archetype where, you know, it's like, I may be a girl, but I'm badass and I can do kickflips and ride motorcycles and stuff like that. But one thing that I think is really interesting about the very first Resident Evil game is that you could pick between two characters in that game, a female character and a male character. And there were like mechanical differences in them. Like one of them, the female character was able to carry more healing items. And so playing as the female character was almost like an easy mode in the game. And so, yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot in gaming culture, and I don't know if this speaks directly to your comment or if this is just like the weird word associations that went off in my brain. But there's a lot of times in gaming culture, this idea that that you have a game and then you offer different skins. Like you can pick at, you know, whichever avatar that you want, but that's just a skin that's layered over the top of the character, and the world interacts with you the same no matter what. And I'm really interested in games that take into account, you know, your body somehow, or that program in different ways that the world interacts with you, or different ways that different characters interact with you based on the identity that you chose, rather than just kind of positing, oh, well, identity is just what you look like, and you could swap it on and off like a costume, and it doesn't really matter because only your actions matter, and it's a meritocracy. And, you know, I think Resident Evil was a good example of a game that, you know, maybe I don't agree with the way that they tried to mechanically represent the differences in how these characters, you know, approached a zombie apocalypse, but it is interesting to consider, you know, maybe different people would go into that situation with different priorities, or would, you know, have different, you know, ways of interacting with the world, or people to react to them differently depending on who they are. And games are a great opportunity to get into that, and to allow people to experience, you know, what it's like to be in different people's shoes. And I think the industry hasn't done a great job of that yet. Right now, it's just, you know, it's the commodification of you can pick any flavor of identity that you want, but it's not really going to affect the story because we only wrote one story and we want you to experience that story. So I'm sorry, commenter. I don't know if that was what you wanted to get into with that comment, but that was just, when you said Resident Evil, that was the, like, what do you call it? Like the path that my brain traipsed down.
All right. I don't know if there are any other questions yet. Since we don't seem to have any, and I can't see any raised.
There's a hand raised.
I just saw it. Yeah, Laura,
yeah.
go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm gonna come on camera if that's all right. I wanted to, I would like you to talk a little bit about, a little bit more about this commodification idea, which has come up many times during your discussion. I know that Dr. Hosey mentioned how Hollywood goes where the money is. And this is something that I'm very interested in because I have the tendency of criticizing anything that I feel that's mainstreaming feminism too much, or that it's commodifying it, and you can tell that's content made for it to be sold as feminist. And I'm thinking Netflix productions such as Enola Holmes, or even Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which is very overtly all the time making these meta references that you also mentioned, how we are very feminists. And also another example that comes to mind, maybe because it's been very recent, and I don't know if you heard about this one controversy about Cara Delevingne in the Met Gala with the clothes that she wore. So she wore, I see some people noting, others not. So she wore kind of a vest that said "Back the Patriarchy." And this was criticized because, you know, it's the subversion of the word peg, but it's also kind of can be read as homophobic, and there's the domination that's implied in the concept. And if you're gonna dominate the patriarchy, you're not really subverting the patriarchy because you're perpetuating the whole domination standard type of thing. But this is, again, this is mainstream feminism. She does this because it's catchy. There's people that it's gonna resonate with. It's like fuck the patriarchy type of slogan, right? So you know, there's a part that it's popular and it resonates with people. It might make less people angry if you go, rather than going into a very intersectional, aggressive type of feminism that I might feel more comfortable with. But do you think that from a popular, like being teachers and professors and creators and people who are interested in popular culture, do you feel that we should kind of celebrate this content even if we're critical of it, or try to fight for a more gendered conscious content that's not mainstreamed in that way, just to feel comfortable for some people and feel like it's something fun and something that, as someone mentioned before, I'm wearing a Me Too t-shirt, like that's not, as you said, productive, right? So from a critical standpoint, as educators mostly, how will you position yourselves against this type of thing?
I'd love to start to answer that. And I think that, you know, feminism is a tool, right? And I think that that's what we can maybe teach our students, is that feminism is a tool that can help you to understand yourself, your experiences in this world, whether you're male or female, as well as what you want to do about these issues. And I think we're all at different places in our feminist journey, right? So I think Beyonce is a great example of someone who, and the scholar Brittany Cooper has a wonderful article about Beyonce's evolution as a feminist, and talks about how even in the video that was referenced earlier, If I Was a Boy, we see this kind of very superficial understanding of feminism being like, I can do what the boys do, you know, and look cute doing it, you know. And we see Beyonce, who watched YouTube clips to learn about feminism, we see her evolving a much more sophisticated understanding of what feminism, and a much more intersectional idea of feminism. Now, you may still have problems with her work or her persona, but I would say that feminism was a tool that empowered her to, again, look critically. I don't know that much about her personal life, but Cooper suggests empowered her in her personal life, it empowered her in her professional life, and made her really think critically about the messages that she was putting out there with her art. And I think the kind of the pinnacle of that, of course, is then the Lemonade visual album, which has all sorts of really interesting and cool feminist intersectional messages in it. So the short answer is, I think we have to be critical. I think we need to call it out when we see it. I think that we need to be rigorous. I also think that if we can manage at the same time to be welcoming, and if you found your way to feminism because of a pink pussy hat or because of a Me Too t-shirt at the Gap, I still want to tell you more about it. So it might be capitalist co-optation, and I am mad that someone's making money off of it, but I still want to invite you to continue on this journey with me, to keep learning more, and to use this tool for not only your personal betterment, but for the betterment of our society, which of course is what that's the roots, right? This idea that feminism isn't just a social movement, it's also a personal movement. So that's how I would kind of address that, at least, if I was talking about it. Well, no, that's how I would address it at the end.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about that Met Gala outfit in particular, and how, it's so hard to craft a message that is going to be provocative enough to get attention in the first place, and not just be seen as a milquetoast, like, oh, she said, can't we all just get along? Or, it has to be spiky enough to lodge in people's brains so that people will talk about it. But then who is the target of the spikes, I think, was the big question about that outfit, right? Again, is this going to be something that the patriarchy is moved by, or is it going to be something that, only circulates in feminist circles anyway, and then, is potentially harmful to queer people? Or another example that I think about with questions like this is when people will make fun of someone like Donald Trump, and they do it by pointing out that he doesn't have a sort of normative, strong masculine body, and they'll make fun of him for being fat. And then the response that you often see on social media is Donald Trump is not going to see your tweets calling him fat and emasculated, but your friends who, maybe have struggles with weight are going to see it. And so you're hurting people that you're supposedly thinking you're protecting by attacking Donald Trump through the means that you're using to attack Donald Trump. And so, yeah, so how do you, boy, that's the big struggle, I guess, is to be so amazing at PR and at crafting the perfect little message that it's the dart that only hits the precise target, and that doesn't accidentally import in this other harmful ideology that we're all just swimming in. But I do think that doesn't mean that we should just throw up our hands and say I guess collateral damage is going to happen and you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. We still have to strive for that, and having the fact that she wore that outfit, and then now we're having this, you could argue, well, now we're having this conversation about queer practices and and how, what does pegging mean, and what does it mean to, is that what she was trying to say? And the fact that conversation is happening is interesting, but yeah, I do not envy the person who was told, come up with a slogan that fits on a pair of overalls and have it be the perfect slogan to be devastating to the social structure like that. I would not be good at that job. I guess that's why I became an academic, because I want to long-windedly talk about the message on the bib overalls, but I don't want to be responsible for crafting the argument on the bib overalls. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of what we were saying before, do we want to ostracize that? Was she a model or was she an actress? We don't want to just say she did a bad job at that sloganeering, and so she's out. I don't think that's useful, but we also don't want to just pat her on the head and say well, you harmed people, but you were trying, you had a good motivations at heart. And so we're just going to skip the conversation that needs to take place.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I think we have time for another question. I think Alba has raised her hand, so if she wants to unmute herself.
Hi. Well, thank you for all of the chat. It was really interesting. I have a question that came to my mind when the speakers were discussing about the representation in books and the problem with Naomi Novik's book in particular. Nowadays, we have this concept of own voices, like talking about the people that are from underrepresented groups should be the ones writing their stories. I mean, I personally agree with this idea in general. I also think that I think that a straight person can write that wonderful queer story. Okay, I see both possibilities, but I think that we have had like a problem ongoing during all history, so that it's time for queer people to write their own stories. For example, enseñing queer people, but we can talk about terms of race, women, just like because we're focused on feminism here. So like women in writing about women and representing women in a proper way. So my question is, what do you think about this idea of own voices? Do you agree with it? Don't you agree with it? The reasons? Thank you.
I mean, I think it's wonderful, and I think that we do need to privilege voices that we haven't heard from. I think that the counter argument, which there's something not counter argument, but I do think that authors can write about whatever they want to write about, right? I don't have to buy it if I'm a publisher, and I don't have to buy it if I'm a reader. So I personally, I think Own Voices is awesome. I think that it's about time. It's belated. I'll never tell anyone you shouldn't write or you shouldn't create. But again, that doesn't guarantee you an audience. So, I think that really for too long, only a very small segment of the population has been guaranteed an audience. And now it's time to maybe take, to balance that out to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, what this gets me thinking about is how sometimes I think people want to take nuanced discussions about creating and critiquing and publishing and funding and reduce them into like very simple rules of behavior. So like, if you are this type of person, you're not allowed to write about this other type of person. And I get that instinct, because if you can make a simple set of rules where I can just go down the checklist and say, okay, I'm allowed to write about A, B, and C, but not anything else, then now I'm safe, right? Like now no one can say that I did anything that was problematic, and or not even that anyone else can say, now I don't have to worry about, how has my upbringing and the systems that I am entangled with, how has that affected me? I can just say, well, I followed the checklist, so I'm good. And, when we were talking earlier about cancellation, I think that a lot of the cancellation troubles that take place are as a result of people wanting to kind of boil things down into simple rules, because then if someone breaks the rules, it's not morally ambiguous. It's, you broke the rules, you knew what the rules were, and then you broke them. Like, how could you? But that doesn't acknowledge that, these are complex situations, and, people's individuals' experiences are different, and, people's, and we do need to take intention into consideration, even if, intention shouldn't overweigh, the consequences of actions and all this stuff. Like it's easier to just say, well, we all agreed on a set of rules, and for now and forever, if you violate those rules, then you did it bad. I don't, maybe this is just how, and I'm not like, I don't really understand psychology. I've never studied that, but I wonder if that's just how this is, like the infant stages that you have to go through in order to have those nuanced conversations. Like you start off with just like when you teach a little kid, don't touch the stove because it's hot. And then, but you just say, because I said so, right? Like, and then as the child grows, then you can kind of expand upon that and be like, well, it's because it could do harm to you. And but there are situations where you can touch the stove. If you touch the stove while it's off, you'll be fine. But when it's on, like you add nuance and you complicate it. And so maybe just like as a culture, at first we were like, not even worried about this question. Now we're worried about this question. And so we're starting with these sort of simple black and white rules. And it can be frustrating because we know that that's not enough. And we know that taking those kind of black and white positions makes it really easy for people who don't care about these conversations to come in and snipe and say like, oh, well, that rule in this case was silly. Or are you saying that I'm not allowed to write a queer character if I'm a straight person? That's censorship or whatever, right? But But maybe this is just like we have to go through this first stage in order to develop the more nuanced scaffolding and architecture of how do we evaluate these type of questions.
Yeah, I would just
no, sorry to have to cut it short because we are almost out of time, and if we are to have a little break before the next roundtable, then we should leave it off here. But I thank you all very much for all of your questions and for having been so active in the chat. If you want to continue the discussion there, I think the room is going to remain open. So if you'd like to continue talking there, you're more than welcome to do so. And thank you all very much for coming. Thank you once again to our participants as well.